What happened in Ottawa that morning caught everyone off guard. A single announcement, delivered in a calm Canadian tone, sent a ripple through Washington. It wasn't a new contract. It wasn't a cancellation. It was something far more unexpected. Canada had just dropped a Gripen-sized bombshell, and the Pentagon never saw it coming for years. The fighter debate in Canada looked like a predictable story. America offered the F-35. Sweden brought the Gripen E. Analysts treated it like a formality. The US had influence, money, alliances, and decades of history. Sweden had, well, a smaller jet from a small country. But on that day, that script flipped. And for a few hours, no one in Washington knew how to react. This wasn't Sweden making noise. It wasn't Saab showing off. It was Canadian pilots, engineers, and officials quietly admitting something they had kept in the shadows. Something they had whispered during trials. Something they couldn't say openly until now. The Gripen E had impressed them more than anyone expected, and once that truth came out, it echoed fast. Because in a world crowded by giant defense companies and trillion-dollar projects, a simple admission from a calm, polite neighbor suddenly mattered. It challenged assumptions. It raised eyebrows. And it sent one message: maybe the underdog was never really the underdog. To understand why this moment hit so hard, you have to go back to the start, when Canada launched its fighter competition. Most people thought it was symbolic. A polite performance before picking the same jet the US already flies. The F-35 was pushed as the inevitable future. Lockheed Martin talked about interoperability, stealth, and next generation capability. Defense magazines repeated the same lines like gospel. Meanwhile, Sweden stayed quiet. No billion-dollar marketing campaigns. No pressure, no drama. Just a simple offer, a fighter built for cold weather, huge skies, and independence. A fighter designed by a country that understood what it meant to guard long borders alone. The Gripen E didn't promise to outshine the F-35 on every chart. It promised something different. Something Canada actually needed, a jet that could survive in remote northern bases. A jet that could take off from short runways. A jet that didn't need an army of technicians following it everywhere. A jet that could operate in the Arctic without crying for support. But critics laughed. They said it stood no chance. They said Canada would never choose a fighter that wasn't American. They said the US wouldn't allow it. Then came the tests. Canadian pilots flew the Gripen E in Sweden. Engineers opened up the systems. Commanders reviewed the cost sheets. And something uncomfortable happened. The jet that critics dismissed kept ticking every box. Pilots came back with smiles they tried to hide. Technicians said maintenance felt too easy. Commanders quietly admitted the Gripen was the more Canadian jet. Still, the politics were too heavy. Even a perfect scorecard couldn't push Sweden past Washington's influence. So Canada went with the, and everyone assumed the story ended there. But it did single quotes because after months of silence, Canada stepped forward with a small sentence that hit like an earthquake. They admitted the Gripen E not only met every requirement, it exceeded many of them. They admitted it scored extremely high in evaluations. They admitted Canada could have operated an entire fleet at a lower cost. And the kicker, they admitted the jet fit Canadian geography better. This wasn't Sweden bragging. This wasn't a leaked rumor. This was Canada, the country that rejected the Gripen, saying publicly, "This aircraft surprised us." That was the bombshell. Washington didn't expect Canada to say anything. Once the F-35 was selected, the topic was supposed to die in silence. But Canada chose honesty. And that honesty made the Pentagon uncomfortable. Because if a close ally openly praises a competitor's jet, it sparks questions. Questions about cost. Questions about performance. Questions about what really happened behind closed doors. Canada's evaluation was supposed to remain a quiet detail. Instead, it became a spotlight pointed straight at the heart of the fighter market. And the reaction was immediate. Experts started asking why a jet with such strong evaluations lost. Other countries revisited their own fighter plans. Brazil, Finland, India, all suddenly had a reason to look again at what Sweden built. Defense writers who once dismissed the Gripen were now writing about its advantages with a new tone. It was like someone opened a door everyone pretended didn't exist. But the most interesting part wasn't international reaction. It was the admission itself, because Canadian pilots didn't just say the Gripen E was good. They said it was built for the environment they work in every day. They talked about Arctic resilience. They talked about sortie rates. They talked about independence. The ability to run a squadron without needing a massive US support chain. In simple terms, They said the Gripen worked. Not in theory, not in presentations. In real-world flying, that kind of praise doesn't come from politics. It comes from pilots who trust their lives to what they fly. And this is where the story takes a sharp turn, because people assume fighter competitions are simply about choosing the best jet. But the truth is far more complicated. Sometimes the best jet loses. Sometimes the best offer gets ignored. Sometimes the world's most advanced fighter wins not because it fits the buyer, but because it fits someone else's strategy. That's why the Gripen's performance in Canada hit so hard. It proved something uncomfortable, something people knew but didn't want to say aloud. The underdog was actually a serious threat. And for the Pentagon, that's the real surprise, because the Gripen E isn't built by a superpower. It doesn't rely on trillion-dollar funding. It doesn't need foreign bases or tech monopolies. It's built by a small, peaceful country that simply wanted a fighter that works well, costs less, and doesn't fall apart in the cold. In an era where giant defense programs struggle with delays, overruns, and endless upgrades, the idea of a smart, efficient alternative is dangerous. Not dangerous in a military way, dangerous in a political way. If more countries start choosing independence over alliances, the balance shifts. That's why Canada's admission didn't stay a headline. It became a conversation, and it didn't stop there, because once Canada spoke, others followed. Chiefs in Finland hinted the same. Pilots in Brazil praised the Gripen's handling. Experts in Asia claimed the jet was far more scalable than people assumed. It was like everyone had been waiting for someone else to say it first, and Canada did. So what exactly was the bombshell that shook Washington? It wasn't that the Gripen E performed well. It wasn't that Canada liked it. It wasn't even that it nearly won. It was the message behind the message. You might have the biggest fighter program in the world, but someone else out there is quietly building something smarter. It hit at a time when countries are questioning budgets, alliances, and long-term reliability. It hit during a period when nations want independence, not dependency. It hit right when smaller countries realize they have options. And the Pentagon didn't expect Canada to reveal any of that. The truth is, Sweden never needed to defeat the F-35 to win the narrative. They only needed one major country to admit what everyone else suspected, that the Gripen E wasn't a cheap alternative. It was a real competitor. Canada's words did more than any Swedish marketing ever could. They didn't just praise the jet. They validated it. And in the fighter world, validation from a respected Western Air Force is priceless. After Canada's announcement, NATO discussions subtly shifted. Defense journalists revisited old comparisons. Military planners started looking again at life cycle costs. Arctic specialists pointed out that the Gripen E's rugged design aligned perfectly with northern operations. Suddenly, the jet everyone dismissed was back in the spotlight, not as an underdog, but as a legitimate future option. And that raises the final question. Why did this moment matter so much? Because it shows a wider truth about military aviation today. The world is changing. Budgets are stretched. Conflicts are unpredictable. Nations want jets that can stay in the air more, cost less, and keep running without a massive foreign support chain. Sweden built exactly that. And Canada, without meaning to, told the world. In the end, this wasn't a story about winning a contract. It was a story about reputation, about perception, about a fighter that refused to stay in the shadows. The Gripen E didn't win the Canadian deal, but it won something bigger. It won respect. Sometimes a single honest sentence from a trusted ally can shake more rooms than any missile test. And Canada proved that. They dropped a bombshell that Washington didn't expect, not explosive, but revealing. In a sky full of giants, the jet built by the quietest voice in the room turned out to be the one everyone needed to hear. Sweden didn't build the biggest fighter, they built the smartest.